down through that little line right there that you'll see in the front of your notebook, that little line. So you're gonna see 1,
I can't tell you about
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 14.
Okay.
You see that?
Yes, sir.
And so all I was wanting y'all to do is kind of, is be introduced to them tonight. I don't expect you to read them yet. Now, after I introduce them, we can tell you a little bit about the purpose behind them, because we don't have a ton of flexibility in this boring, what I call the boring part. But I want you to be, at least, have a comprehension of what's there. There's no test. So, and then at the next meeting next month, what we'll do is I will review those to see if there are any questions and all that. And then we'll introduce this next meeting from here to here. So these will be on the agenda twice, tonight for introduction, then next month for review. Then these will be introduced next month and reviewed the following month. So
I didn't get a new
they'll
one.
be on there, so we'll get through it in a fairly
She took it.
way. So as you scan through this, you're gonna kind of get a gist. Some of
I've got a
it's
few
lot of
where it's
belief,
just gone.
but
I gave Kim mine and I
and then
grabbed
there's
Leonard, he just gave it to me.
a table of contents
Oh, you do?
again on the next page.
Thank you.
And then there's a table of contents inside each article. They appear right here if you're looking for something, or right at the beginning, like in number 1.
Son,
You know, like what
Thank
happens
you,
in a
Mark.
state of emergency. We gotta set up an emergency hospital.
Have you been?
or housing, floods, tornadoes, coronaviruses, or whatever. So there's all kinds of little good
Yes.
stuff in there.
then
And my name is
I
Ray
had a
Blow.
massive
I'm
pack.
from Appleton, and so I work with the town.
I didn't know where it came from.
And if I need to meet you,
I was just
down
looking
there
at-
or
fly out there
something.
and
We,
get
you
a son.
contact me, just coordinate
Yeah, he's got an
it.
uncle that passed away.
Okay?
Oh, I had to bring
School,
something.
I'm free to float all day if I need to stop back
And
and
it's
get
just
it.
kind
Quick
of
thing
We'll
tomorrow.
keep you called
All right, like I said, we're heading to Salisbury now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good luck with
too.
everything.
Apparently we weren't sworn in like.
No, we were
I thought
not.
we were. I thought I was.
I don't know how big they
Were you
get.
here last
I've
meeting?
seen pictures of them. Some of
Or
them
maybe
get
it was
pretty
the meeting
solid.
before that.
No,
Yeah.
when I first started, I thought it was, but I guess
No, we weren't.
I couldn't remember.
Nope.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's that.
Are these on?
They are on, and we are live right now, just so that you are aware.
You don't curse.
Right.
Oh, darn.
No wordy darts
We
Nope.
are live on YouTube.
on YouTube.
We are
Yeah.
live.
Gee, thanks.
Somebody's smearing some red stuff all over your counter here. Looks like we need a magic eraser.
Huh?
Somebody had their phone charger up here. Where's Madam Chairman at?
Hey, how are you?
Is that our liaison?
That is our liaison.
Hello, is the liaison?
How you doing, Ashley? I can hardly tell people with masks on.
I'm coining you too, because I've been calling Barefoot Boss, so.
This is so much smaller than the last one, thank goodness.
I need you dead center.
Okay.
Only because it's the only seat available.
Well, I can move if Madam Chairman shows up. He can move over here.
And the chairman's not gonna show up.
Oh, she's not coming?
She has resigned.
Did she officially resign? Okay.
She resigned, as did,
I knew she was talking about it. I didn't know that she made it official.
close to. This clock, right?
Well, Kim, you need to get up here so it's not on minute.
1 minute.
It's good.
I think Diane's gonna bring some water in a few minutes, so.
Thanks, Diane.
You're welcome. I'm good. Yeah, thank you.
I have it too.
Yay, thank you.
I have some. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'll read you.
You won?
Thank you.
these in case someone needs an extra one. Good luck.
I believe it is the proper hour. For those of you who don't know me, and we are filming this, I'm interim town manager Leonard Barefoot. And the reason I'm here to moderate the meeting for a short period of time is we have received a resignation from our chairman and vice chairman within the last week. Susan Shirley and Vicki Lundstrom, I believe about 20 years each. So we thank them for their service. So it is truly a new day and new obligations. A lot of things are going on in the town of Landis. So you all are becoming, if you've not already been sworn in to the board, a very important part of what's going to happen in the next few years in the town of Landis. So I call the meeting to order, and let's stand and say, make the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It says here, call the roll. So I better not do this. I think I got it. Ron Fike, Sam Dedman, Stephen Overcash, Mark Cannell, and Vic and Miss Swan.
Very good, yeah.
Okay. The first order of business is an introduction, and maybe I've just done that, but I want to go around the room, if you would, and just say a little bit about yourself. We don't want to spend a lot of time, but for those who may not know us, and again, we are being filmed, so Dr. Fife, you want to start?
Okay, yeah, my name's Ronald Fight. I'm sort of a retired instructor, so I taught for 20 years for the Run Cabarrus Community College and the North Carolina Community College system. So I was the guy that traveled to all 58 colleges in North Carolina, and my specialty is continuous improvement or business process improvement. So I've got my years in to retire, so I've crossed that milestone, and now I'm actually going back out and doing some additional teaching, a little more consulting, if you will. So I'm making that transition all this year.
My name is Sam Dedman. I grew up in Landis. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Margaret, for 40 years this coming May. Holy cow. I work for Creech and Associates Architects in Charlotte. We design the research campus and all the buildings on the campus, except for one. Working 3 days a week now, trying to semi-retire.
My name's Stephen Overcash. I've lived in Landis for 32 years. I currently work for the City of Kannapolis Fire Department. I've been with Landis Fire Department for 16 years. Just trying to make a difference for Landis.
My name is Mark Cannell. I grew up as a teenager here in Landis on West Ridge Avenue. I now live on the other side of Landis in the Oaks of Landis. My family and myself, we've been back almost 5 years now. My wife is a teacher in a local high school, South Rowan. She's course director. And, of course, I've been involved, and as well as Kim's been involved with our HOA over in the Oaks of Landis. And my first summer job here was actually working at the Dairy Bar, which I hate to see closed down across the street. Someday, maybe, fingers crossed, we'll have somebody, the right person, reopen that. I am in the hospitality industry. I've actually launched new hotel brands as well as developed brands and done both operations and sales for multiple properties.
Kim Zavon. I have been in Landis only since 2014, so I guess I'm the newbie around here. I'm originally from New Jersey. Definitely interested in the town I live in now, Oaks of Landis as well. I'm on the HOA board currently. I've been an engineering recruiter for a staffing agency for about 22 years. And right now we hire primarily for medical devices for different Johnson & Johnson medical companies, and that's me.
We have one new member who came earlier. He could not stay. He had to leave, and his name is Dale Udi, and we did swear him in, and that fits nicely with our next order of business, which is to swear in some new members and Mark. So we've arranged to do it all in one fell swoop. We have to reach out for Bibles.
No problem.
Thank you.
Your right hand on your left hand. Down on your left hand, and then down on your left hand.
I didn't make a copy of yours, so, and then that one. Was it done and I'll make you a copy.
And by way of introduction, the lady that will swear you in, for those of you who have not met, is Amber Levi. Amber is the town's recently hired HR person, HR / town clerk. So she does have the authority to swear you all in, and I believe it would be appropriate to stand and
Absolutely.
Left hand on the Bible, right hand.
that's it.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I will read and you'll repeat after me, except for the name part, and then state your name. All right. I state your name.
I, Kimberly
Mark
Swan,
Canales, Jr.,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
and laws of the United States
and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws
and the Constitution and laws
of North Carolina,
of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my position
the duties of my position
on the planning board.
on the planning board.
So help me God.
So help me God.
And then we'll sign all of these.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Amber. The next order of business will be, the next order of business, maybe I ought to do a little housekeeping before we actually
On the left-hand side. That's okay.
elect a chairman and a vice chairman. At some point, we will elect a secretary. I'm not sure we'll do that now. We'll let you all get to know each other. During the time of the work on the development ordinance, the 160D, we felt it necessary to have very, very clear minutes. That was at Rick's request. And so Amber will be with us until we get the 160D accomplished. In speaking to Rick earlier, and he'll have the floor momentarily for the rest of the meeting, we will be looking at the rules to follow. Some of them will be changed. Some of our rules that are in place are difficult to find. We found some back in 1989, but I've learned we're going to actually adopt some new ones, so we won't spend a lot of time talking about the number of members of that or things of that nature. Do want to talk about Robert's Rules of Order. We typically, that is the one that we would follow. And I've got some cheat sheets. You can put them in your notebook when you have time at home and you get really excited about learning about Robert's Rules. You can spend some time learning them. When I was in high school half a century ago, I was in FFA, and one nice thing about FFA is they taught us Robert's Rules, and we had to hold meetings and do debates, and
Thank you, sir.
very educational process. I failed a while ago to introduce, and I'm not sure if it was which board it was, that the board appointed Ashley Stewart, the mayor pro tem, to serve as the liaison between the two boards. So he is here this evening to do his part. It would be appropriate, what I'll do is ask for nominations to be made for the position of chairman, and if we get multiple ones, we will vote on them, or it would not be inappropriate for someone to make a motion and ask for the motion to be voted on by declaration. So the floor is open for a nomination for chairman.
I would actually like to nominate Mr. Fight as chairman.
Okay. Are there other
Yes.
I'm still
nominations?
listening.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm nominating you.
Are there other nominations? If not, I'll take it, well, I guess that's the motion, so let's, all in favor of appointing Mr. Fight as, selecting Mr. Fight as chairman, say aye.
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 Okay. Likewise, all opposed. I'll receive a nomination for vice chairman.
I'd like to nominate Kim Zwan, is that correct,
Yes,
for vice chairman?
thank you.
I second that.
Okay. Are there others?
I'd like to nominate Sam Devon.
All right. Are you all opposed to doing, is that any further nominations? If not, are you all opposed to doing a vote by hand, or do y'all want to do a ballot?
Can I recuse myself or recluse whoever that term is, Leonard? I think Kim would make a better chairman, vice chairman than I would.
If you refuse, well, recuse and refuse rhymes. So if you want to do either, you could do that, and then I'll ask.
Okay.
I'd like to do all the above.
Okay. Then I'll ask all those in favor of Kim becoming the vice chairman, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
Thank you.
All those in favor of me sitting down.
Opposed?
We'll leave that up to you.
All right. If you have no further questions,
But we don't want you to hold the meeting.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and if, I guess some of you are new, but Rick has come to help us go through this. He's very experienced. He's many years working in this type of endeavor, and we're blessed to have him. And I'll just turn it over to him and let you tell a little bit more about yourself. You did do that last time, but we do have some new members. So with that, Rick, I'll give you the podium.
Point of honor, right quick, Leonard,
Oh.
do we need to approve the December the 8th, 2020 meeting minutes?
That I was gonna, well, that's true, I'm sorry. Actually, what I should do is, Ron, you should switch with Stephen, and we're gonna turn the meeting over to you.
Yeah. Yep.
Kim?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna give her my seat if she could make it easy.
I will let,
Musical chairs here.
I'll let the chairman take over the meeting at this point, but it is, you're correct, the minutes of the last meeting would be first to be, I got ahead of myself.
You would want to tell us the Robert Rule of Law for a musical chair.
It's not in there.
That's exactly right.
And while we're getting this accomplished, I want to make one thing clear. We do plan and will adhere to the governor's directives for COVID. It is obviously, I don't have to tell you how serious COVID-19 is, and we have 10 people here. If we have situations where we go beyond 10, I'll arrange to have them either out in the hallway or only here momentarily. So that likely won't happen unless there's a rezoning hearing or something of that nature, but we will work through it.
If y'all see these go on and my mask come off, it's because they fog up every time.
Well, if you could figure out how to stop
I
that,
know.
you'd be
Yeah.
a rich person.
Exactly.
Mr. Chairman, you ready?
As I'm ever going to be, probably,
I'm gonna
until I
raise
find out how
that.
to sit at the big boy table.
You got this, brother.
This thing down low. All right. Okay, so let's get started. I think we were down to number 5 on the agenda, approval of the minutes from the December meeting. Did everybody get a copy of those minutes?
Yes.
I did not.
Did not.
Here, I've got an extra.
Did you get them?
Oh, yeah, she did give them to me. I apologize.
Oh, that's all right, okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Are there any changes or additions? motion to accept these minutes?
I move we accept the minutes for December.
We have a motion, we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Okay, old business, and I know that the old business is going to be a little bit different for everybody that's in the room, simply because of the fact that everybody's here at a different transitional time. So is there anything from the business standpoint that we need to discuss in the old business? There was a lot of information in the minutes that I think was covered up. So anything there that you see that we need to discuss? Okay. Okay, so we're going to take those minutes as it stands. So that brings us into number 7, the new business. At that point in time, and I think everybody's got the books, and I'm like everybody else, I'm just seeing this for the first time tonight, so this is going to be sort of the first thing out of the chute. So, Rick, I believe this is the point where you begin to take the show, so I'm going to yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And board members, congratulations on your appointments and elections. You're gonna find that this is gonna get a lot easier once we get beyond the next couple of months. And when I say easier, I mean it's really just going to be probably a large amount of material. And so I will try to manage that funnel as best as possible, but it will, and we have a professional here that understands what I'm going to say when I say we're going to feel like we're drinking out of both ends of a fire hose at times. Simply because the state has kind of backed us into getting this done. So with that said, just for the benefit so that everyone's kind of on a level playing field, I'm going to back up a minute. I'm going to give a brief introduction of myself as requested by Mr. Barefoot, and I'm going to give a very brief 3 to 5 minute overview kind of what I introduced to you last month, and so that you can see we're going to keep this digestible. It's a large amount of material, but it's not something you need to worry about drowning with. So, first of all, my name is Rick Flo. I've been a Kannapolis resident since 1987. And so this Memorial Day weekend will be 34 years that I've been here. I was actually involved in getting the city of Kannapolis up and running in its planning and development related services starting in 87. That's what I was recruited to do. And so I had an office there in downtown Kannapolis for many, many years before selling a business that actually contracted. So I was not an employee, I was a contractor to the city. Myself for about 15 years, and the company that I sold actually ran another 10 years or so there for a total of about 25 doing municipal planning related work. So I've been around the area. I've been a neighbor of Landis's for many years. Now, as I mentioned, I was a contractor, so I was actually working statewide for municipalities all over North Carolina and ultimately beyond the borders of North Carolina, which is what led me to where I am now. I went sort of full circle. I burned out in 2001 and too many suits and airplane tickets and was all over the country doing what I'm doing with you. And after a reboot, I decided I'm going to scale that back. I'm going to stay in North Carolina. I'm going to focus on the smaller communities because when I first started out, my goal was smaller communities. That's what I really set out to do when I started that first business in '86. I moved it here in '87. So you've got a little bit of background on me. I'm from Greenwood, South Carolina. So that's where I was before I made it to the big city of Kannapolis. The overview that I want to provide, and I'm keeping this kind of short and sweet, so if I leave anything out, you can always ask me questions. But the overview I want to provide is that, first of all, 160D, which I stood at the podium with very little ammunition last time, which is what I'm holding in my hand, is different than a change in state law. It's a change in what's called enabling legislation, which means that they didn't just modify something and we have to now comply with something. They actually repealed the old statutes and created new ones that actually authorize local governments to be in the business of managing growth and development, which they all have to be pretty much anyway, okay, to deal with new developments, new subdivisions, streets, utilities, everything that goes, new stores, shopping centers, anything that's happening in town, there is a role to play. And so what we have to do first and foremost is update all of our ordinances that relate to that arena. Planning boards are actually created in those statutes. Okay, that's where they are created by law, by statute in North Carolina, as well as boards of adjustment. And that's where your authority and your role is defined. And you'll see a little bit more about that as we get into those particulars in the ordinance. The current ordinance, which was lying on there's an old, smaller 3-ring binder that was over here. I'm not sure what happened to it, but that is your current older Unified Development Ordinance, which is considerably longer than the one that we're working on for you now. Because those new statutes essentially did 2 things. One, they took all the statutes from 1959 that had been changed and tweaked and adjusted with little inserts here and there for 60 years, and they reorganized it. And while they were at it, and I'll tell you who they were, but while they were at it, they reached over and grabbed all the case law out of the court system, the North Carolina courts, dealing with anybody that might have appealed anything to a city that had went on to the courts or anything. And I've had cases that went all the way state Supreme Court. I've had over 100 cases go to the Court of Appeals, or where I was involved in as an expert to the Court of Appeals. And what that case law does is it adds clarity to the written law. Well, when you've got 60 years of case law, because you've got a 60-year-old written law with a bunch of edits to it, now you've got all kinds of confusion. So the goal of this little 3-person committee by the North Carolina State Bar Association, it was 3 attorneys, was to get all that reorganized and get all the case law in there so we don't read something and then have to wonder whether there's a case somewhere on record over the last 60 years, not just last year, but 60 years, that might offer some insight or clarity or direction about it. So now we've got it all neatly in front of us. There are many people that think that that's a big, big deal. I spent a lot of time digging into it starting about 1.5 years ago when it was first adopted, trying to figure out its implications in the ordinances for towns. And what I've deciphered through that process, after I would write and then realize, well, wait a minute, I'm overcomplicating this, is that it actually simplified a lot. So it's really not as ominous as people think. The deadlines are what are creating some pressure, because these replacement ordinances are your local laws, the statutes are the state laws. Your local laws have to be updated not later than June 30th of this year, because anything else that's on the books evaporates that night, like pumpkin chariots and glass slippers and all that. It just poof goes away, and which is unlike a change in other laws. Sometimes it just changes, and whether yours are up to date or not, the state law is still the state law. In your case, all your old stuff goes away that's in this arena. Don't throw everything away. And I'll work with the clerk's office to make sure that the archiving and things of that nature are done properly, because one of the unique things about these planning laws is they actually are, and this is where the grandfather clause really lives, because of and that's a slang term, I know. It's a sexist slang term, but it is the slang term. But the grandfather clause, as it's known commonly, lives in your planning law because a lot of the decisions affect real property. And those decisions create things like a house or a business or a building that was created at a time when the law was a certain way. Then the law might change, but the building or the house or the thing is still there. That's where that grandfathering, if you will, it's really called nonconformities, and you'll understand all this shortly, comes into play. So it's very important that we archive, we keep our old stuff in reference, because sometimes we have to go back and verify things or determine what someone's grandfathered or nonconformity rights are. They're property rights, okay? And I'm a firm believer that we have to protect property rights. They're there for the person who owns the property, and they're there for the persons who are affected by that person that owns the property. So it's kind of a win-win scenario that we have to seek. The subject property and those surrounding the subject property have to be in balance. That's the foundation for planning laws in North Carolina, okay? Now, a little bit about the approach that I mentioned last time before, but you didn't have anything in front of you. I mentioned before that because the statutes really lay out a lot of groundwork, I tend to break the approach to the ordinances up to make them more digestible for you as we're going through this process of setting everything up. And there's the very first thing you'll see in your notebook, if yours is like mine, is a thing that says a reading guide at the top. That reading guide is simply for this planning board and for the Board of Aldermen when we get to them for their convenience. That page can go away after your work is done. It's not a real part of the ordinance. But I break them out into really three groupings. The first, administrative and procedural, is largely confined by the stuff that's in that 160D general statute. That's a whole new chapter of 160D. It basically wraps the parameters around the authority a planning board has, how you appoint them, and what have you. We have to kind of regurgitate it into how we're going to set up our planning board and what our planning board's duties are specifically going to be here in this town and all those sorts of things. How we appoint them, what their conflict of interest rules are, what their oath of office, it states all of those things in that section, and we'll get to that. But that's an example. Amendments, variances, appeals, permits, all of that stuff that you see under administrative and procedural is largely bound by those general statutes. So we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room. We can adjust a few things. How many members are on the board? Do we want to have the boards play this role or that role? Do we want to combine our boards? Do we want to have a joint board with China Grove? You know, those are all little tweaks that we can make locally, but generally how they function and what their authority is and everything else is by statute. So I call that section the boring stuff. Okay? It's the boring stuff. You're going to learn a lot, but and you might ask some questions, and I'll let you know if it's something we can change or not, but I'm not going to let you make up crazy stuff and put it in there just because you ask for it. I will tell you if it's too crazy. And I'll do the same thing when I get to the Board of Aldermen. Just don't tell them. They don't know what's coming. Because my job is to keep things between the ditches, so to speak. Once I'm gone, they can lose their minds if you want to. The second grouping there that's only got a few things in it, state and federal mandates or equivalent, that's really just what it sounds like. States don't really come up with stuff. Usually it starts at the federal level, but the federals will send it down to the states. Watershed protection, flood damage prevention, erosion sediment control. These are things that sort of evolve around construction and development. And they're largely couched in environmental arenas and insurance cost and risk arenas. That's what those are. So the federal government says we got to have this. They direct the states to do it. The states say, we don't want that hot potato. We'll throw it down to the towns and the counties. And so that's why they're in your lap. Okay? And if you thought the first grouping was boring, wait till you read some of the stuff in that second one. It's the really boring stuff. Okay? And now and I'll get into sediment erosion control, things like that, because there are some things that we're doing with that are a little bit unique. But generally speaking, something like flood damage, we can change three things in that whole section. It's one of the largest ones in the ordinance. We can change the name, or I can change it from Landis to Spencer. Okay. I can change your ID number, because you have a community ID number, from your ID number to Spencer's ID number. And I'm using them as an example because they're right on your heels, or right neck and neck with you on doing this, getting kind of a late start and getting it going. The third thing is the number of certifications that are required on projects that might be in risk areas. You know, do we want 1, 2, or 3? And so that'll be the big decision. So out of about 30 or 40 pages, we really get to decide about really how many certifications we want. I recommend all 3 because it saves taxpayers money in the long run. It saves homeowners money in the long run. and you'll see what I mean by it when we get to that point. It'll take you about 3 minutes to debate that stuff. So with that said, that leads us to, if you notice that page, that's probably over half or around half of the content if you break it down by the different articles, okay? That next grouping is the fun stuff. I call them the character elements. The standards and specifications for achieving the desired character of Landis. That is the stuff that will make Landis what it is that Landis wants to be. That's where we get to run around and do some things and create some unique stuff and everything else. And so I kind of take a stab at that based on what I see and what is kind of trending out there and what the market's calling for and a number of other things. When I say trending, I mean what are homeowners thinking and businesses, what are they, you know, what are the things that are going on in that? Pedestrian-oriented stuff, this and that and the other. That'll include all kinds of building-related design standards and what have you. And you'll notice that I refer to things as standards and specifications. I don't like using the R word, regulations. The reason being is most of this ordinance really is standards and specifications for development. Very little of it is thou shalt do this or thou shalt do that. You know, it might say you got to do a sidewalk or something like that. Okay, but generally speaking, it's standards and specifications for development. I grew up in an engineering firm, so I've got probably some commonality with the architects here in the room in how we used to build our plans and specs, and that's kind of the secret sauce to town building is plans and specs. So while you're working on the boring stuff, these first two groupings up here, myself and my staff are actually hustling behind the scenes to try to get enough material together to bring you that unique stuff, the character-related stuff, because we have to kind of get to know the community really well to do that. We don't have to even know where we are hardly to talk to you about the variance procedures. You follow me? So we're sort of tricking you into y'all focusing on the boring stuff while we're having some fun with the exciting stuff, but that's really so we can get that to you and it have some regurgitation of reflection of this community as a starting point, because we don't have a lot of time. We don't have 2 years to study this and run around all over the place doing everything. So we're going to be moving kind of quickly.
Richard?
Yes, sir.
Am I correct in understanding that we've already been given an extension due to COVID-19 and the new date is the date?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, there's actually been 3 dates. The original law, which is Session Law 2019-111, if anybody is into looking that stuff up, was adopted in June of 2019, and it set everything in motion, and it set a deadline of January 1, 2021, which was last week, basically. It also set an effective date of those rules for the same day, so it became law the same day you were supposed to be finished. So I had this big paragraph in there that dealt with trying to write to 2 sets of law, and I had everybody scheduled to adopt in late December so we could explain to the court why we couldn't exactly make them meet on New Year's Eve. Fortunately, or unfortunately because COVID-19 created the April 2020 COVID Relief Act by the state of North Carolina, not the federal one, but the state level one. As a rider in the back of that big giant act at the state level was a little thing that said, we're going to bump the due date to August 1st. The effective date was still January 1, so it gave you about 7 full months to get your house in order. 2 months later, while none of us were looking, the legislature popped out a little bit of an overhaul of 160D, which did some more rearranging mostly and clarified 1 or 2 things that a few lobby groups sort of worked in there and got them to do. And so we've got all of that. That was Session Law 2020-25. One of the great things that Session Law 2020-25 did, which was, is it said, well, we're going to move that August 1 deadline to July 1. We're going to take a month away from them. But it made it effective immediately upon ratification by the governor. One day in June, I think it was either the 19th or the 19th or 22nd, something like that. I've got it in the front here. So it's in effect now. So actually, if a project were to come before the town today, we have to sort of go take our old ordinance, and as we're applying it, we have to be informed enough to be able to adjust our application of it to satisfy the new state laws, regardless of what our old ordinance says. So we're under that law now. And our deadline for getting our ordinances up to date so they don't evaporate is now July 1, which means they need to be made effective by hopefully June 30th by our Board of Aldermen. I know that's kind of a long answer about that, but that's giving you a real clear picture of what's happening out there. Now, something that that we're doing for all of the towns, because obviously 160D has been tweaked and tweaked a couple times now by the state, is after adoption by the governing board for up to 2 years after that adoption, we will amend your ordinance for you at no cost should the state yank the rug again or push or shove or, adjust things again, okay? If there's a change in the deadline, that'll be a little bit of relief for you if that happens over the next couple of months. Some towns are counting on it. I can't, as your professional. My code of ethics would not let me just gamble on, well, maybe they're going to do this or that's what we thought they would do. I have to work on what has been adopted by the state. So right now I've got you drinking out of the fire hose, okay? So with that said, we're going to try to get the boring stuff rolled through over this meeting, the February meeting, and have it kind of in your rearview mirror at the March meeting. Doesn't mean you can't change anything, because you're going to vote on this at the end of the day. You're going to vote on this probably in April or May. I say April with a strong emphasis because we kind of need to give the Board of Aldermen more than one weekend or a couple of weeks with this, because we have to present our recommendation to them, bring them up to speed, and then they have to post notice of a public legislative hearing, and that requires time. They have to conduct that hearing, accept feedback from the public, and then vote on a final version. If they direct me to make any adjustments or anything like that, we got to be able to produce all of that and then get it voted on in June so it's effective by the last day of June. So that's the tail that's wagging us as the dog in here, okay? So, giving you a little bit of background, so the way we're going to approach this is, if you look at that reading guide again, you'll notice in the left-hand columns the little boxes. And you notice up at the top I got a couple check marks. One means introduced to the planning board, one means reviewed by the planning board. So tonight on your agenda is the introduction of all of those articles in that first grouping down to that little line. Does everybody see the little line under the two boxes?
Yeah.
Beside Article 14?
Yep.
So tonight we're going to introduce Articles 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 14. Then at your next meeting next month on the agenda will be a review. That's where you'll have an opportunity to provide feedback, ask questions, discuss in depth. So between now and then, your homework is to review the material yourself and to read it. I'm going to introduce each one, kind of an overview, but then you'll be able to then, at your leisure over the next month, read through those. And I'll stress to you that you don't need to memorize them, you don't need to be an expert in them, but I do want you to read them, because a lot of that is just bounded by the statutes. Okay? Then at that meeting in February, after we've reviewed that grouping, then we will introduce the ones between Article 14 down to 15. You'll notice it goes all the way through the mandates. You see the next little line down there? That'll be another one. That'll be 22, 23, 18, 19, 20, 2, and 15. And there's a rhyme to the reason for the order. that you'll get to know more about as we go. And it has to do with the end users, not you learning it or getting introduced to it or reviewing it, but really the real world out there when they look stuff up, go to your website, find things and all that. It'll be more user oriented. And I'll explain that. And you'll get the first dose of that when we hit 14 tonight. So then you'll see the same the same leapfrog game played the next month. In the March month, we will review 22 down to 15, and then I'll introduce 11 through 21. Okay? And then in April, we're going to be working diligently to get through 9, 10, and 8. And that's where everything kind of comes together. You'll notice the last thing is actually the districts and the use tables. For those of you who've been on this board before, those districts and the use tables are really the foundation under planning and development and zoning and things like that. But I like to back into those. I don't like to declare some district and then try to come up with some standards to go into it. I'd rather work out what it is we're trying to be and then craft the character districts around those parts of town. The Main Street district. Guess where we use that? You know, around Main Street, the middle of town, the core. Residential Main Street transition areas. That's those areas that grew and emerged. I see 1919 up here, and I'm sure the town's older than that, probably 120 years ago. So we don't want to go create some brand new zoning district that we'll pick a name for, as if people are going to build new subdivisions in those older parts of towns, because then what happens is we start to throw those older property owners under the bus. A lot of towns make the mistake of applying new development standards to old parts of the town. And they don't realize that those older parts of the town, if you suddenly got a whole bunch of houses that were built 25, 30 feet behind the sidewalk, and you put some 30-foot setback in there, every one of them is technically non-conforming. Yeah. And since the Dodd-Frank Act, following the recession in 2008-9, okay, that risk assessment that banks and insurers have to go through looks very closely at what they're writing policies on or what they're taking as collateral on financial transactions. So it became very serious, very significant. Nobody cared about that. They just say, oh, it was grandfathered in prior to the Dodd-Frank Act. Since the Dodd-Frank, it's become very important. It can prevent someone from getting a refinance or a loan on a house, or it can create issues with underwriting on insurance policies and everything else. And that can affect affordability if they've got higher risk or perceived risk, or they perceive that something can't happen. So we craft those districts for those older areas. I call them the BZ areas, before zoning, the areas that just grew up more organically. Then we've got our standards that we'll set for our new growth areas. That's where we're really creating this new parts of town. Now the old parts may have redevelopment in them. So we have some new development, but we're not going to have a 100-acre subdivision come in and wipe out all of downtown and start over. You follow me? So you're going to see these districts really designed around the character of the area that you've got, because zoning is really not planning. Zoning is actually where you are. Planning is that visionary process about where you want to be. So we're going to zone towards where we are with a very little speculative zoning. We'll put speculative zoning out where we know it's needed. That way your tax rates and assessments and things of that nature are more on point with folks. I just had this issue come up in a community earlier where they have zoned a big old long highway, all commercial. No utilities in that area. What's the probability it's going to be high value commercial? Little to none. What's their assessed value? It's higher because of the zoning designation. It allows those highest and best uses, but the location dynamics aren't there, meaning sewer's not there. Location economics, meaning the location criteria, access, traffic, demographics, whatever the measures are that those businesses look for may not be in place yet. So what are we doing? We're oversupplying the market with that type of commercial zoning on speculation, and what we're actually doing is reducing the value in said same market, commercial property in Landis. So So while governing boards a lot of times don't realize that they actually control the market, they'll say, I've heard them say hundreds of times, oh, we don't control the market. Absolutely do. Towns absolutely do, because you're controlling the supply of commercial real estate on the market. So you do control the market, and when you oversupply, you devalue or undervalue. Common business principles do apply to governmental decision-making. So that's the path. And I wanted to take a little while to go back over that. So I'm going to start with some rapid fire, just moving along to introduce you to these articles, unless there are any questions about anything I've said so far.
I have one quick question for
Sure.
you, Rick. You asked, or you said that you stated your staff is collecting and preparing information for Section 3, the character of Landis. Can you give us the cliff notes of how they are doing that?
Well, there are two things that happen. One is through all the data on the existing conditions.
Right.
Okay? Existing conditions are what's there now. And that all gets mapped out. Okay? The second aspect is, that's more data and inventory looking down at it, if you will. The second aspect is that character part, and if everybody remembers, I don't know if I did it last time or not, because we really hadn't jumped in all the way. I was kind of introducing myself, but I usually ask a question, and I'll put it like this. Has anybody in here ever been 10 years old before?
Yeah, we all have.
Is that everybody has? Wow. First time. Usually I don't have many people confess to that, but I was. And what I do is I get people to sort of think about where they grew up for a moment when you were about 10 years old. And when I say that, it's because when you're younger than that, you kind of know your universe is more like your yard, your house. But by the time you're 10, sometimes earlier, of course, but by the time you're 10, your universe is broader. You can get around. You got a longer leash. And so you knew how to, for those of you who might have grown up in the country, or those of you that might have grown up in a small town or a large city or a suburb or whatever the case may be, you know how you could cut through here and zigzag over there, and you could jump the bicycle across the curb at this point, or you could cut through the fence, you could get across somebody's backyards. There was your universe. Well, as the, quote, new guy, I just happen to know more about Landis, having lived next door to it for almost 34 years now. But generally speaking, I don't know it intricately. So you're going to hear about the guy. There's going to be this guy. He's related to me. His name is Ricky Flo. That's the 10-year-old was Ricky Flo. And there's been newspaper articles of the guy on the bike and all that stuff. So what I do is I get to know your community, but I have to do it pretty fast. Yep. And it helps me understand the dynamics of neighborhoods and places and parts of town. Planning is really not spelled with a Z, even though we're working on zoning. Planning is really more about getting into the character of the community. We just have to translate that into some zoning definitions and so that we can set some standards and specifications. So when development does happen in an area, you have something established for the level, intensity, density, quality, et cetera, for how that happens. So that's how that happens. So Tom is actually doing data crunching, and I have an assistant. His name is Ricky Flo, a 10-year-old kid,
Right.
who gets out there himself.
Thank you for sharing.
I have almost 30 employees or somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't even know. Patty takes care of all that. But I love getting out there and doing that stuff myself. Patty will say, when are you going to stop? I said, I can't. I just love what I do. I love what I do. It's like getting to be a kid and go out and mess around the neighborhoods. So you may get a report at town hall one night or one afternoon, because I love it in the evenings. That's when more activity's going on, more people are moving around. I get to see kind of how, where people fly, like in downtown Kings Mountain. I call it the landing strip. That's Battleground Avenue. The landing strip is where there's 3 lights in a row, and as soon as the first one turns green, they take off for 3 blocks right through the middle of town. So so what we're doing is we're changing all that. We're dealing with that. A lot of people wonder, what are we gonna do? Put up a speed limit sign? You know, no, we have to deal with the human element. And that's the part I enjoy the most, is how do I take all this stuff in these ordinances and make it really relate to serving people, humans, communities, businesses, homeowners, residents, the environment. It's got to be the 5 wins. The citizen or resident, the business, natural resources, leadership, which includes this board, the electeds, the staff, okay, and those looking to invest in your community, whether they're local or not. Doesn't really matter. My philosophy is, if we look to the local government to do everything for us or build everything for us, we're not going to be able to afford it. So what we do is, if the community is going to spend public money, it plant that money in strategic ways to stimulate private investment, to get people to want to be here. Look at you were talking about Kannapolis as a firefighter in downtown Kannapolis. Why did they build that baseball stadium? Why are they doing this and that? Well, if you read the newsletter in last month's water bill, you'll see they've already generated a payback of private investment that has just about matched the public investment, and it's just now really starting to get off the ground, you know, and that's happened in just a few short years. That's miraculous, and that's what we want to set the tone for here, to try to stimulate a interest in doing things and doing things well here, okay, and not just be about regulations. So I'm going to close that commentary with that Richard Pryor. Everybody's heard of Richard Pryor, right?
Yeah.
And what did Richard Pryor once say? This is a neighborhood. This is not a zoning, excuse me, this is not a residential district. And that really captures the essence of what we try to do. You know, your zoning ordinance has established all these residential districts and business districts and everything, but that's a little bit sterile sounding. So what we really want to create are dynamic places and neighborhoods that people want to grow up in, they want to grow old in. Your kids want to go out and explore the world and settle back in that community, not leave. You know, because our future is our turnover in our generations. If we are not multi-generational as a community, we will ultimately find ourselves relying on the tax burden of the senior citizens who age in place until they can't stay, and then they move to some place that does. 'Cause I see that all the time. Towns that don't want anything. They don't want any condominiums. They don't want any townhouses. They don't want anything. They just want their ranch houses. And then what happens when your 125-year-old grandmother can't mow the grass anymore? She's in Charlotte. She has to go somewhere else. You know, so we have to think about that and make conscious decisions about that. And you do it in scale. You don't let giant apartment buildings take over your community. There's ways to deal with that. You're going to learn that in the fun stuff when we get down into that third grouping. Okay, there's easy ways to make common sense decisions about things. We don't have to, complex problems do not all have to have a complex solution. And when we're writing policy like this, it's always best to try to make it to where we can find common sense solutions rather than big, expensive, complex ones. Okay? Any other questions before I take off into Article 1? All right, what's our time now?
6:25.
6:25. Okay. Like I said, this is just an introduction, so we're not going to be memorizing, we're not going to be diving into a lot of deep stuff or anything like that, but your purpose and authority in tab number 1, you'll see there's a micro table of contents that gets you all through it, and the yellow is stuff I just simply have to come back on before it's all done. You'll also notice on that page there's a watermark that says December 16th, 2020. Whenever we replace pages, because we've updated a draft for you, what I will do when I send that in to the staff at Town Hall for your next meeting is you may find that we're replacing only pages 3 and 4 of that article, and it'll have a new watermark on it. So instead of replacing the whole article to reduce paper and what have you, but that way you'll know what version you're looking at, should we be making changes. So a lot of that stuff up in the front end is just what it sounds like. But this gets into the fundamentals that deals with the jurisdiction. We have to declare our jurisdiction. We have to tie in our town plan, and that's one of the things that Tom's also working on. And the principles in that plan. So there'll be this plan that goes with these specs. The plan is more the visionary, conceptual document, and the ordinance is more of the specs around how we get there. This deals with everything from dealing with conflicts and inconsistencies to severabilities. This is court stuff and construction. It creates your zoning map. A lot of people don't realize this, but on page 5 you'll see the establishment of official zoning map. Your zoning map is not a different animal. It's not a relaxed animal. It's not a casual thing that lives somewhere else that somebody's got somewhere in a file or on a wall. It's actually a component of your ordinance. Okay, and it is connected at the hip to this. Interpretation of boundaries, and that gets into all that stuff. And last but not least is something that's unique, that is not couched in the state statutes, but I'm quite proud of, is state of emergency beginning on 6. And that has been updated in 2020 because we really had always been dealing with things like flooding or whatnot. And until this virus, we really didn't have some new issues. A lot of times we were dealing with emergency housing. People would say, well, planners would put on the internet questions like, I've got, FEMA's lining up with 47 trailer-mounted temporary housing units, and my ordinance says we can't have mobile homes in town or something like that. What do I do? This gets the governing board over, it gets staff over that hump. It gives us the ability to deal with common sense solutions during emergencies. Okay, so that tent hospital going up in the parking lot, so we don't get somebody in a zoning pickle saying, well, I'm obligated to follow the ordinance, and the ordinance doesn't give me leeway, but yet that it's a critical thing that needs to be addressed. So we just simply create those components. So that's what really Article 1 is about. It deals with authority, where it expands, extends, how it's measured, and when it can be excused through an emergency. Notice we're going to skip over Article 2. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what Article 2 is, because you see a table of contents there. Article 2 is that common question from the homeowner. Most of the ordinance is really developers and all kinds of other stuff, businesses and major things, but a lot of the common sense stuff is right up front. I've got a driveway question, I've got a fence question. So that's why we're skipping over it, because we're going to move it into the character grouping. It just happens to be that stuff that applies everywhere. Article 3 is super exciting. It's 48 pages of definitions, symbols, and abbreviations. You'll see yellow in there in the back, particularly where I've got to make sure that I don't forget to have consistency once we start naming districts. But this typically doesn't get into defining words as much as it defines phrases. Like everybody knows what a lot is. Everybody knows what a record is. But a lot of record, what is a lot of record, okay? And so that's what the definitions are really about, is phrases that might appear in here, and how we define those, okay? So you don't need to worry too much about them, but there they are. And some of them are couched in some of the mandates, and we don't have a lot of wiggle room. Some of them are tied to flood, some of them are tied to the watershed, some of them are tied to things like that. Some of them are also tied to some of the court cases at the federal level. The U.S. Supreme Court has handed us some case law that's not necessarily captured in the state enabling legislation because some of it's character related. Okay, so we're gonna if you want to thumb through that stuff and kind of get familiar with it, feel free, knock yourself out. But it's intended to ease the burden during interpretation by a property owner or an administrator if they're trying to get to a conclusion or draw a conclusion. Maybe there's a property owner who doesn't understand why something, and those definitions can help the administrator, that's the person in town hall, explain something more clearly and what have you. It also gives the Board of Adjustment clarity if the Board of Adjustment has to make a legal interpretation, because that's one of their duties and roles. So tab number 4. speaking of Board of Adjustment, tab number 4 is where you individually were born where you were born, but you as a board were born right here in Article 4. You're going to be recreated because this is new enabling legislation, so you're going to be reestablished, reconfirmed, recreated, born probably June 30th of 2021, right here in Article 4. The Planning Board, the Board of Adjustments, meetings, hearings, and procedures for all boards. Now, there will be supplemental, as Mr. Barefoot pointed out earlier, there will be something in addition to this that actually gets into the nuances of your conducting your meetings. That's called the rules of procedure. We keep that separate than the fundamental stuff so that y'all can change it. So that if you decide, well, we want to change something about our meeting schedule or something like that. We don't want to put everything in the ordinance, or you have to go through a big deal, notices in the newspaper and public legislative hearings and all kinds of other stuff to change this ordinance. But rules of procedure, if you want to change the meeting time, or those are the kinds of things we'll put over there. And rules of procedure are probably 3 or 4 pages long. But you'll notice this article that creates these boards and lays the foundation is less than 5 pages. And that's the beauty of, I call it the beauty of the structure of using 23 articles, is we don't have any articles that are huge, other than like definitions and flood. Most of our articles are going to be much more concise. So it's easy to find information when you need to. But not many people will refer to those parts, boards and commissions. Once you're set, you're kind of set, but unless there's a question, this really just creates you, and then it's finished talking. Okay? Number 5 deals with changes to this ordinance. And remember I mentioned that the zoning map is a part of the ordinance. And so it lists that up there. You know, initiating amendments, the process. That's that first 7 pages are really about any changes to the document itself or to the official zoning map. The stuff that begins on page 8 of Article 5 is called conditional zoning. And I will dive a little bit deeper into that in the review next month after you've had a chance to read through it, because it will kind of explain itself. It's for those unique circumstances where things don't fit neatly into one of our conventional districts. That gives us a tool in the toolbox to be a little crafty in creating something at a unique location that might be of a unique size and character that requires special consideration. So we have that, I call them tools in the toolbox. Will you use conditional zoning a lot? Not likely. You may choose to, but I don't recommend that you make it a big part. It's just for those tough situations where you're trying to make something work out. So those amendments, if you look at your old ordinance, a lot of older ordinances will have a different set of processes for changing the book, if you will, and changing the map. In fact, they're exactly the same, except on a map, you just have to send a notice out in the mail to property owners that live adjacent to it, and you have to put a sign up. That's the only difference between changing the map and changing the book. But yet a lot of ordinances waste a ton of paper explaining 2 totally separate arrangements. I've just compressed that into one, and there's an extra paragraph on that extra notice requirement for map amendments. A map amendment, by the way, the nickname of a map amendment, since we're telling you the real names of things, is a rezoning. Everybody's heard of a rezoning. Okay, well that's a map amendment, a zoning map amendment. That's amending a page in the ordinance. Any change is a map amendment or a text amendment. And you'll notice that section is about 12 pages long, including that fancy-pantsy stuff that begins on page 8, where you got about 5 pages of that conditional zoning process. Now, all of the stuff in that article, Article 5, this is an important sort of pause in the introduction. All that stuff about changing the ordinance, adopting the ordinance while it's new, changing the map, all of those things are what are referred to as legislative authority that rest in the governing board. That's the Board of Aldermen. The statutes, 160D, and its predecessors required that before they can change any of this, they are required to have you study and make a recommendation. Now, they can accept your recommendation, they can work off of that and adjust it, they can throw it out. That luxury rests in their elected position as a legislative body. But the legislative process requires that it be vetted. And this is why I want to take just a moment on this, because the amendments, that rezoning that will come before you from time to time, is really a change in the ordinance, a change on the map, so that a project can go a different direction. Maybe it's farmland and it wants to be a subdivision or something like that. Your role in making that recommendation is to ensure that before the electeds get it, that someone has sat down and looked at the long-term vision, sort of the contemplation of the big picture, because that's what we'll be working on later this spring, looking around the town and sort of looking at what those areas want to be. Some will stay just like they are. Some might be areas that change occurs or is best to occur. So either preserving or changing are the two real focuses of that exercise in kind of visioning those areas. Then when you make your recommendation, you're really making your recommendation based on the ideas, the vision, the big picture, kind of looking out for the best interest of the town as a whole. When the electeds get that, they've now got that perspective, and they will hold a legislative public hearing, or excuse me, a public legislative hearing, what we used to call public hearings. The law changed that too. They're now legislative hearings. So I'm calling them public legislative hearings so people kind of know what we're talking about. And that's where the neighbors come in and say, hey, I got this letter about this, and I'm really concerned about this change for whatever reason. And that way the electeds get to hear from the citizens who are typically thinking here and now, how it affects me, my backyard today. But you have looked at kind of the big picture and given them a recommendation that makes sure that they've at least got in their field of vision the big picture. So it's not just about what somebody wants. Because the rezoning really can't be about, well, you know, Leonard, he was such a great kid growing up. We like him. His folks gave money to the, you know, to the baseball makeover down here where we fixed up the field and all that stuff. And so, we'll approve that. They've been a great family. You know, they're just great people. But that Rick, man, I tell you, that guy was a rascal growing up. He was always causing trouble around town. We're not giving them anything. The whole intent is the legislature's trying to get these councils or aldermen to make sure that they're not just looking at that sort of here, now, who is it that's saying these things? It's my backyard and your backyard, this neighbor against that neighbor, that there's somebody advising them through a written recommendation that I or your staff helps prepare each time. Yeah. So they've got that big picture and that immediate sort of here and now picture. And then they can make an informed decision. That legislative decision does not have to be justified to say no. If they say yes to that change, they do have to justify that, and we draft at this level, at the planning board, that statement of consistency with that plan that's adopted and that statement of reasonableness about the change. So they don't have to explain themselves to just reject it. They can just not like it and say no. But if they like it, they have to, if they want to change something, they have to actually justify the change. They don't have to justify rejecting change, because it might just not, the timing might not be good. Well, we're not going to have sewer out there, or the road project's not going to be finished, so the traffic might be more of a problem, so we're going to say no at this time. They don't have to even justify it. They can just say no. That's their prerogative. But that's how legislative process works at the local level. That is not appealable unless they say yes and there's no explanation. That can be appealed. Okay? We're about to change hats, though. We're going to turn to tab 6, which talks about variances and administrative appeals. Remember that Board of Adjustment that we introduced in Article 4? Well, they don't deal with these amendments and things in Article 5 like the planning board does. This is the part they deal with. Those don't have public hearings. They used to, but they no longer do. The courts have said that unless you have standing, if somebody wants a variance to reduce their setback from 5 feet to 4 feet because there's a creek on the other side and they don't have room and it's not going to work and the creek keeps eroding and they're afraid to put the shed or the tool building or the garage or the swimming pool too close without causing a problem, so they need a little leniency, so they want a variance, that somebody on the other side of town that might not like them can't come to the hearing and just chirp about it. That boards of adjustment now constrain the appeals and the variance hearings to strictly those that have standing, which are those people that abut the property or have an ownership interest in the property. And that's it. Anybody else can actually be asked to leave. And I understand that. That came out of case law. That's not something that was ever written in the statutory law. That's stuff that was ruled upon where people would come and they'd show up at a public hearing on a quasi-judicial matter that really was just between these two neighbors. But they'd show up and get involved and disrupt the hearings and everything else. And so the statutes have now reeled that in and said if it's a variance, it's really about that house and it's about the people immediately next door that might be affected, and that's it. If we're going to move the building over a little bit too much, how does that affect somebody across town? It doesn't. You follow me? So those are now called evidentiary hearings. So the planning board deals with legislative that they send to the governing board. The Board of Adjustment deals with evidentiary-based hearings that are court-like. Evidentiary means everything that's said is testimony. Everybody that says something is sworn in before that board, like if staff and maybe a property owner and anybody else. Maybe it's an appeal to a decision that staff makes. They don't like our decision. Who do they take it to? The Board of Adjustment. Okay? So the Board of Adjustment has to conduct that based on evidence, not what they like or don't like. They actually have to make findings. They have to base it on that evidence. Okay? If somebody doesn't like what the Board of Adjustment does, it doesn't go to council. It doesn't go to the Board of Aldermen. It goes straight to Superior Court. Okay? So, and the Board of Aldermen can appoint the planning board members to be the same members on both boards, which is what I typically recommend. Because the Board of Adjustment should only be needed once every couple of years, really. But if they get rusty, that's dangerous. So I like having the same group, this is my recommendation to the alderman, the same group be that planning board, but also get called into action when the Board of Adjustment needs to act, because you'll never be hearing your own decision. You won't ever be hearing an appeal to your own decision. You're that far apart. But you would be experienced enough to be able to spin your hat around, conduct a quasi-judicial hearing, and get those facts and make that interpretation, because you're the most familiar with the intent of the ordinance. And that's what makes planning board members ideal for Board of Adjustment, is what is the ordinance trying to accomplish, so you can add clarity to that interpretation. Bigger cities will have separate boards, because they might wear their Board of Adjustment out on special use permits or something like that, and we'll get into that stuff, maybe later in Article 7, the next page. Article 7, Permits and Procedures, is that wonderful section that lists out all the things you ever wanted to know about how you would approach a project if you were doing obtaining a permit, or submitting a plan for a new business, or submitting a site plan and plat for a new subdivision, or a number of things like that. And this spells that out. And I see that I've got a typo in there, Gaston, because this was last done in Lowell. On Article 7, I've got that. I thought that had been replaced already, but anyway, the printed ones don't have the replacement in it, so my apologies. Article 7, the table of contents is wrong, the ordinance is not. But that'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know. Now, a couple things I want to zero in on, and when we get into this next month, I'll give you a little bit more education on this, but generally a couple things I want to zero in on is zoning vested rights, which happens to be down towards the bottom on page 24. Zoning vested rights used to be this separate animal. And the statutes really spent a lot of time trying to sort that out. In fact, it's the whole front end of these things, trying to sort that out. And the more I read and the more I scratched and tore up and deleted and changed as I was kind of cutting my teeth through the new law about a year and a half ago, the more I realized that they actually simplified some things for us. So what I've actually done is I've made that section on vested rights. If you notice on page 24, it's only about 1.25 inches long, that paragraph. Most ordinances used to have a couple pages on that because it was a separate process, a separate procedure. And because the statutes make it an inherent right, I made it an inherent part of every permit approval. So depending on the type of project, the size and magnitude of the project, it's going to be built in. So when somebody gets a subdivision approval and it's 3 or 4 phases, it's going to take them 5 years to do. You know, there's automatically several years that it's valid, and there's provisions for extensions of that if they have run into issues, maybe the economy slows down, whatever, okay? And just kept it as simple as possible. There's no reason to have a separate process. In the old days, your plat was good for a year, and you could go through a public hearing and approval at the planning board and approval at the governing board and have it good for 2 years. And then nobody's ever finished in 2 years on big subdivisions anyway. So it didn't make any sense, and it was a bunch of hoops. So the state fixed it, and we fixed it in here to make it just part of that approval when it's granted. Okay? It's just an inherent part. So that's an example of some of the big things that really changed. Now, there's a tool in the toolbox. I'm big on tools in the toolbox, and it happens to begin on the next page, page 25. Development agreements. That's about 2 pages, a little over 2 pages of material, but what a development agreement is, and you're going to notice as you read through Article 7, that we are going to be requiring, or my recommendation is that we require development agreements on all your major projects. And we've got some thresholds in there that we define. What a development agreement is it's the ability to lock in your zoning, to prevent elections and things like that from yanking the rug out from under a project. Okay? So it works kind of hand in hand with the vested rights process, but it's something that developers tend to understand a lot more than ordinances. They tend to understand agreements. Mm-hmm. So it's a form of contract, basically, between the town and the developer on that. Now, what that also opens the door to is the ability for you to set up joint participation things more clearly. Let's say there's a water line that needs to be extended, and the town wants to change it because it might serve some other property too. They want it a little bit bigger, but the developer's only willing to pay for their part. Well, the town can't just make them put in one that is for somebody else's capacity, but the town can participate with them, and this is the tool through which you would set up an arrangement like that, where the town might, cover the cost of changing the water line from a 6-inch to an 8-inch or something like that, okay? So that's just well, really, I don't even want to say 6-inch. From an 8-inch, we're always going to be looking at fire protection as a big part of that, of every decision we make. And that's where that plan comes in, is what are the other densities in that area planned for? So how do we then size these lines? Now, we're almost to a good stopping point, if you'll just bear with me just a little bit longer, because we're gonna look at the back of 7 real quick. You'll see some certifications. We do those in simple form. There's actually a 3rd page that's being added for Landis because Landis has some unique things that they've asked for, and we've got that ready. You'll see that. That's been sent. Amber, I don't know if you saw it in your email or not, but it's been sent, so it'll be there for next month. But there's a page that goes in between the first one and the second one in the certifications to deal with your watershed certifications. I do these as simple as possible. The first grouping is for every subdivision plat that comes in, it has to have the stuff on that first page. If it's a major subdivision, which means maybe new streets are being built and all that, then they also have to do the certifications on the second page. We make it easy to upload on the website, so a surveyor can simply copy and paste these right onto their plats. They don't have to retype or rewrite or do anything like that. And you're gonna see there's a lot of that in here. A lot of that happens in here. Technical standards, streets, stuff like that. The engineers can simply copy and paste those into their detail sheets on their construction drawings and submit them, so we're not looking to see if we like what they're submitting. We make sure it's the right one, and if it is, we're good. So it streamlines plan review, things of that nature as well, because we don't want them coming up with their own inventions. Now we're going to kind of skip along a little bit to Article 14, and this one you're going to get a big kick out of because it doesn't make it to the third page. It stops on the second page. It's really short. Now you're wondering why it jumps over to 14. That's kind of a play to the user, to the end user. When an engineer or designer, LA, landscape architect, generally architects aren't messing with their zoning ordinances. Mostly it's LAs and civil engineers and stuff like that. But for the most part, when they're in here, they're going to have different articles that they're swirling around in that are right over here in this neck of the woods in the ordinance. And we wanted them to see this, called Flexible Development Standards. 160D gave us something that we've needed as a tool in North Carolina for decades and never had, and that is the ability for staff to make minor modifications, provided that those minor modification authorities are spelled out. In other words, it doesn't allow Shelley to just, yeah, that sounds good. I'll be good with that. You know, she can't just do that. She can modify or accept a modification that's within a certain range. So when you start looking at that, you're going to see some yellow stuff in here and say, well, that looks like too much or whatever. Well, that's just a placeholder. I want you to think of how much authority do you want to recommend that staff has to wiggle these things around. Because I've seen situations where a developer couldn't meet something by an inch, and they're begging City Hall for an inch, and city staff says, I don't have that authority. You got to go get a variance. Well, this falls in between. This gives that local staff member a little bit of leeway if you want to do that. Now, keep in mind, I'm building this like ragu spaghetti sauce. It's all in here. If you see something that you don't want to recommend to the governing board, like this flexibility, we can change that and just reserve Article 14 and scrap it. If you want to establish more constraint over the degree of flexibility, like instead of 10% or this or that inches or whatever, we can change all of that. Okay, this is something that we have a lot of leeway in. But if you said, well, don't we have this, and I didn't have something to show you as to what it would look like, then I'd have to try to explain it. So now you can see what flexibility looks like and how it has to be defined, and we can now craft it. We can move up or down in the numbers. We can add more constraints. We can add more criteria. We can take some away. That is going to rest with your thoughts and your feedback on what you trust staff to do. And then, of course, the governing board's going to have their shot at that too. But so far, that's been extremely popular among everybody. With that said, I have now introduced to you the first batch. And we will walk through each one of those, and I'll call it out at our next meeting. And if there's anything, questions, discussions, suggestions, typos, anything like that, just raise your hand. If I make a mistake, I'll fix it, not a problem. So if you see something goofy, like the fact that I didn't fix the reference to Gaston County in the table of contents, don't hesitate, because I make no bones about it. I do not reinvent the wheel for every town. There's no way you can do that in these budgets. No. We work off of tried and true structure, and we keep moving that, advancing that ball throughout models in North Carolina. When we get to the character stuff, that's where you're going to go all Landis, okay? That's where we make Landis what Landis is, not the same thing that China Grove is, and not the same thing that Spencer is, or that Belmont is, or wherever you want to look, okay? That's where we really get unique. This other stuff, a lot of it is right off the boilerplate. It gets a little better every time I do it, but I don't reinvent that wheel from scratch. There's no efficiencies there. Now, I have to have some water. Your next meeting, I'll just mention this to you, Mr. Chairman, in case you don't have your calendar handy. Your next regularly scheduled meeting is coming up on February 9th at 5:30. If for any reason this board wants us to add an extra maybe work session in between or anything like that to shorten your meetings or to give you more time to ask more questions, to roll up our sleeves on anything, all you got to do is let me know, and we'll see what we can do. The first half of the month is always absolutely wall-to-wall on Mondays and Tuesdays, because every town meets the first or second Monday or Tuesday.
From your standpoint, let's just take the next meeting. How much time do you anticipate in each meeting we need to actually go through? And I know it's going to be variable depending upon the changes that maybe people are asking about or questions that they have, but on average.
Hour and a half on average.
Hour and a half?
Or more.
Okay.
I try to make this move as efficiently as possible, but that's also kind of relying on you to at least thumb through and kind of get your arms around the things that interest you the most. You know, maybe y'all divide it up and say, well, you know, you look at this, I'll look at that, and we'll throw our comments out. That way, you know, not everybody feels like they've got, 60 pages of reading to do in a month or what have you. Because the definitions, I mean, if you really, I've got towns that read where there'll be at least one board member that reads every little thing, and that's great if they want to do that. If they don't, we still got your back. Now, here's the other thing I want to make sure you're aware of. I mentioned earlier that if the state law changes within 2 years of the Board of Aldermen adopting this, we'll fix it at no cost. We will change it to that new statute at no cost. We also will provide the town 2 years, no-cost administrative support. So if Shelley's got a question, hey, am I reading this right? Because they're getting used to the new ordinance. No problem. I'll be happy to answer at no cost to the town. We'll do that for 2 years. Okay? So we've got the town's back after adoption, too. We're not going to just vanish with a briefcase full of cash or anything like that. Okay? Mr. Chairman, I think you had asked if we were going to need this earlier, or somebody asked me if we were going to need this.
Yeah,
screen.
I did, yeah.
While we're in the boring stuff, it's really not necessary unless we need to put a section up while we're wordsmithing something. But when we get into the character stuff, this is where we'll be. We'll be up here a lot.
Okay, you ask a question, and I don't know the answer, so I'm going to ask on everybody else who's in the room. Wi-Fi access, do we have Wi-Fi access, public Wi-Fi access here?
Sure we do.
Okay, because I think that was one of the questions you were asking about.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how I would connect to this. If it was hardwire and I needed to do it up there, or if I can do it through my laptop sitting out here. I'm actually quite proud of myself. Normally, planners are not known for being able to sit and talk at the same time. Normally, we have to be up there. But I've actually made it through an hour and a half or so sitting and talking. That's kind of a first.
You've done good, Rick. Good job.
But I like having a work table where I can spread out a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's the reason for that request, is because I know that at some point fairly soon, we're going to have some PowerPoint stuff that's really informative, and we'll bring you up to speed. Like, we won't just keep throwing these articles at you one at a time. We're going to give you some information. Then here come the articles that sort of support that vision. Looking at a neighborhood that's complete and versus looking at all these standards that some guy named Rick tells you is going to give you that kind of neighborhood is a different story. So I can kind of show you what it'll look like, streetscapes, things like that. And then here are the standards. This is how we build. This is how we create that.
Well, I think it goes to the point too of knowing the seating arrangement. So if you're going to be using the screen, it kind of helps us determine what we need to do out here in order for people to be able to see. Because I know from here I'm fine, but I know where Sam's sitting, that's a hard spot to see.
Yeah.
And I can, when we do that, if I can figure out how I can advance things, so if I've got Wi-Fi and I can, or Bluetooth, or somehow or another I can, not Bluetooth, but whatever it is, I can wirelessly link to it.
Yeah.
So that I can be up here and advance my material, then that's all I really will be trying to figure out. Then that way, the other board members can adjust their seating without a problem.
Rick, I have one question for you as a matter of business. In this notebook, do we need to leave these here? Will you update them, or you'll just bring us?
Normally, you keep them, and what'll happen is every month, well ahead of the meetings, I will send in my material so that staff can print and punch. And normally what happens is they'll paperclip and they'll stack them, so you'll have a little stack when you walk into the meeting of, right now it's about 6 or 8 documents per meeting to go ahead and insert.
So we can keep these.
So you need to keep
we'll get
those,
We'll
that's
get the
right.
additional
So
fillers.
you'll get to build them yourself
Perfect.
next month, rather
Thank
than leaving them here. And then, we may have, so when I send in, I may have instructions on there, I'm trying to talk to everybody
You're
here.
good.
I may have instructions in the email to reprint Article 1, pages 3 and 4. And that's so you can take the old 3 and 4 out, put a new 3 and 4 in. And I say 3 and 4 because we're printing both sides, so there may be a change on one of those pages, but you'll need to replace that whole piece of paper. That prevents us from reprinting whole sections and whole articles and wasting paper. And then I recommend to you, they'll all be watermarked. When they're revised, there'll be a new watermark, new date on it, so that the clerk world can track the most current file, because they will replace the whole digital file over the old one. But you and your notebook may only replace a page, because that's the only thing that changed. And then when we get to the end, the watermark will go away for you, and it will become a planning board recommendation date, and that's what you'll see, and that's what will get posted out there to the world for public legislative hearing purposes. So everything will say draft on it until the very end, maybe with the exception of the things that we don't really get to change, like flood damage prevention or something like that, because that really, there's no reason to reprint those with watermarks over and over, because we really can't do much with them.
Right.
And then when it's all said and done, we'll remove all watermarks, and your adopted stuff will go up online, things like that. So we're going to be here side by side with you to the day that you can go online, because one of the things 160A does is actually says that your stuff has to be available on the internet. And so we like setting it up where one of the pages just has each of these articles where it's a link. I can go click on parking, landscaping, signage, those kinds of things, and get that article right there. So if I'm a designer, I may have landscaping and parking side by side, because they go together like peanut butter and jelly. You're not usually designing landscape areas unless you're designing parking lots, around a commercial area or something.
So as we go through and we're doing our reading, just as a matter of record, what happens with this information? Are you recommending that we simply make notes in these books, or
Right all over them.
Okay, that's what, make sure I don't want to destroy something that is.
The only page, there's only one page in here that's a little sacred right now, and it's because of the cost. Right in front of tab number 1 is this color piece that is not printed on yet, just in case there are changes to the table of contents.
Yeah.
In the final version, what we'll do is we'll see if we can collect these up and reprint them out for you, or what have you. Right now, if you look right in front of that page, you'll find all those tables of contents, and right up behind the reading guide is the page that looks just like that one. The color one will look. But we didn't want to burn that form up yet until we knew there were no changes to that form.
Right.
Okay?
Good.
Other than that, everything in the book is for you to scribble and scratch on. Even your individual article tables of contents may change if we do much editing in there, where if something begins on a different page or whatnot. So enjoy yourself. Take your red pens, sticky notes to make flags so you can find your stuff, like, oh, I want to talk to Rick about this and this and this and that. And yeah. Well, look here's an example. Here is my 160D. Notice the flags. These are all cheat sheet flags
Yeah.
that help me get to the different key components of the new statute.
I had a question. Is there any, like, where would we find that 160D? Like,
Okay, if you go to the North Carolina's General Assembly or legislative website, and I don't know the name off the top of my head, but it's the state of North Carolina. Okay, I usually go to their table of contents page, and then I bookmark that on my laptop. And when you do that, then you can drop right down through that table of contents page all the way to 160D and click on either, viewing it as an HTML, or you can download the PDF. And what's up there right now is actually from Session Law 2019-111, because we're just now finishing 2020. They've not uploaded the stuff that was modified earlier in 2020. So you're going to be looking at the older version of it. And they have rearranged a few things. So as you're reading in here, if you see something that says like 160D-602, and you pull up that old session law, you might see 6-2.
gotcha.
The codification people told them and said, hey, you can't write it this way. Our code doesn't work that way. So we had to insert zeros where there were dashes and stuff like that. So you'll see that. But I've been begging for the new version to get uploaded. If you want to go straight to the session law, you can go in and search that on the legislative website as well. And the original one was Session Law 2019-111, adopted, of course, in 2019. The one that sort of readdressed a few things is under Session Law 2020-25. That's really bad when you know session law numbers. You're definitely a geek when you know session law numbers and stuff like that. Can cite state statutes.
Thank you.
And Chapel Hill also had some stuff on there as well that broke it down with some different short videos for you as well. And I see that he's already printed it out. And I've looked at them a lot. Back about 2 months ago, they were up. I don't know if they're still up or not today, but they broke it down a little bit. And have you looked at any of those that they had online?
I have. This is on the record, so I'm going to be careful here.
And be careful about endorsing certain.
Well, one of my, I have to split my alliances to numerous universities in the state of North Carolina because I have 5 sons who all have 5 significant others, and not all the degrees are from the same farms. But let me say this about Chapel Hill, which is where my eldest son graduated and eldest daughter-in-law. The North Carolina School of Government is hosted by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and it's a great resource for local governments. One of the things that we have to be a little bit cognizant of, though, is that also makes it an extremely popular arena for undergraduate and postgraduate research. So there is an enormous volume of material coming out on the 160D. It's a hot topic right now. So you're getting a ton of academic review, research, interpretation, et cetera, et cetera. And so I look at that, but I also have to be the one that converts it to the real world. And so I think it's helpful, but I think you can find yourself deep in a large vat of material when the real outcome of it, the real implication of it is relatively straightforward and relatively simple. So don't get lost in it.
No.
Don't catch yourself wallowing in it simply because there's 5,000 things that have been about and videos about it and sessions about it and all that. It's not quite that complicated.
Right. I concur with you on that. It's communication, like beside yourself coming.
Right. It is. I mean, it's definitely going to give you some perspective.
Yeah.
It's going to give you some perspective. Some of it's going to get really deep into the weeds,
Mm-hmm.
Because there are things like legal fees now that 160D cleans up. In the old days, and we don't have to deal with that in our ordinance. This is stuff that you're not even going to see in your ordinance. This is stuff that might surface in a real case that has been appealed into Superior Court or something like that. Where if an applicant appeals something or has to bring charges against a town in a legal matter because they feel like they've been unjustly affected by decisions or approvals or lack of approvals or whatever it is that is the question, if the town is ruled against, if they rule in favor of that petitioner, then the petitioner's attorneys do not have to petition the court for legal fees any longer. It's automatic. The town automatically pays all their costs, which can be expert witnesses, it can be attorneys, it can be all kinds of stuff. And this is one of the things, this is the kind of stuff that you may see some writing about, because it's going to imply that maybe we're going to find ourselves as local governments with a bigger target on us. You know, in other arenas where there's clear access to money, you'll find sometimes easy targets. You know, you see that in workers' comp claims, or you might see it in personal injury or automobile accidents or any number of, you know, medical malpractice or whatever. You know, you see commercials all the time for, have you taken this medicine or that medicine? There's been an award, there's a big settlement out here, so you know, there's a target. Well, in the past, we were not necessarily big targets in local government. One of my predictions is we're gonna have a much bigger target on us now, because all those fees are automatic. Somebody doesn't have to hope they get paid back. They automatically get it. There are other issues in there about the effect of estoppel, that local governments can't plead estoppel. That's a fancy way of saying two wrongs don't make it right, so to speak, in their pleadings, in their cases, that that we're prevented from that. There's all kinds of stuff like that that's way into the weeds, deeper than coming up with our policies on growth and development, our standards, our specifications. So you're getting a light dive into it. That other stuff is really what the town attorney is going to need to be concerned with should staff make a mistake, or should the Board of Adjustment, make a ruling. That's one of the reasons why I'm going to be stressing to you that anything you do it by the book. I think you heard Mr. Barefoot say that I was a little bit insistent on things about minutes and things about all that stuff. Those kinds of mistakes, and I'm not an attorney, so I cannot give you legal advice. There's my disclaimer. But those kinds of mistakes are largely fatal, is what the history shows. By that, I mean that judges, a lot of times, and I've been involved in a lot of cases. I have a lot of cases under my belt. I do a lot of work for law firms and municipalities in the state as an expert witness, and DOT and others. And what I have seen is that the judges tend not to care, because most of these cases are not jury and don't involve juries. They involve bench trials, which means a judge looking at, did they do this right? Did you violate somebody's rights when you denied this or granted that or interpreted this way or that way, or whatever the case may be? And if I may say so, the judges really don't concern themselves with whether it's a good idea. Was this project, was this neighborhood, was this business, was this building, was this rezoning, was any of this a good idea or a bad idea? They really don't look at that. They don't really care if somebody's saying, well, would you like a store next door to your house? That sort of thing. That doesn't concern them. What they tend to look at is, did you follow due process? And if you skip any I's being dotted or any T's being crossed, then you did not follow due process, which means you technically violated somebody's rights along the way, generally speaking. And I'm not an attorney, but those are almost always fatal. They almost always result in things being
Excuse me.
And that's where a lot of the UNC Chapel Hill material.
Right. You got to weed through it very carefully. Yeah. Correct. I agree.
I think it's going to inform a lot of people. It's going to help planners that do what I do. Shelley, your staff, do things more cautiously and better. But it's not necessarily going to affect you as long as you stay in bounds. And we will get to that when we're doing the review on Article 7, when you see things like staff bringing a site plan to the planning board for input. And you look at your old ordinance and you'll see where you might have had to vote on it. And your new ordinance doesn't say that. Because planning boards are notorious for wandering off the path sometimes and saying, well, I can't vote for this unless they agree to do this or that and the other. Statute's very, very clear that you can't require anything that's not written in that ordinance. You as a planning board, you can't do it. And I see planning boards try it all the time. And with damages now being, dealt with in the new 160D, I think that's going to become more of a potential exposure for towns.
Excuse me, folks.
There I am almost practicing law. I got to get away from that. I'm not doing that. So the way I've got it is written is in order to keep you as a planning board in your proper role and not overstepping or not exposed to positions where you might overstep and therefore create liability on the part of the town. So when you read it and you say, well, gosh, our old ordinance, we could controlled everything. And this one, you've kind of watered us down. Yes, I have. But that's because this does. So I'm keeping you in a place where I think you can have more fun. When you get to the creative stuff and the character stuff and you do more studies, you're not just approving rezonings or something like that. To me, planning boards really need to be coming up with ideas. Because once the governing board has zoned a piece of property, whatever, and somebody brings the plan in and it meets all the standards, you don't need boards to look at that. If you don't want subdivisions in that area or don't want that density in the area, then don't zone it for that.
Yeah.
And once you zone it for it, then all they really need to do is just meet the standards and specs and go to work. Don't get hung up on looking at it and going, well, I don't really like that subdivision. Well, if you've zoned that property for that density and they meet those standards, they have the right to it whether you like them or not. So your best tool in the toolbox is don't zone it till you're ready for it to go that way. And that's why you've heard me say peel the onion back, zone for kind of what's out there today, and then do rezonings as change presents itself.
Yeah.
And then once you rezone, let the standards and specs take over. Let them run with it. Because this is the place. This is what we want to rest our comfort on and say, yeah, this is going to take care of us. This is going to make sure we get those amenities or those standards or those types of character to the neighborhoods that we're looking for. Densities or sidewalks or parks or whatever. Okay? And you'll get to see all that in the fun stuff.
Very good.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to start kind of opening the floor up a little bit for the rest of the board. Do y'all have any questions for him before we begin to turn him loose? If you have questions, now is absolutely the time.
Not for me.
Good. All right, well, listen, thank you very much, because I'm learning on the fly at this whole stage of the journey, so I appreciate what you've done today. It's kind of helping me understand this process a little bit better. So I'm the newbie when it comes to planning.
And that's what I'm here for.
Good.
I appreciate it too, yeah,
That's what I'm here for.
Absolutely, we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The only other thing, I guess, is talk about if there's any other items that, from a board standpoint that we need to discuss. Y'all have anything that we need to bring to the table?
Not here.
We're good. All right. So I have a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We'll
Thank
see.
you.
Let's see. What do we have? February the 9th?
February 9th? Yeah.
February 9th at 5:30. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turn everything off.
Yeah.
And as long as I've had a mask on.